So before talking about regional policies, I think we need to mention a few data that are important to take into account. We've spoken earlier about the need of each of us and our collective needs as well that must be taken into account. We must never forget about that. There's still an economic debate. We must not forget about people. So responding to different parameters, starting with the vital ones, vital needs, also ethical ones, looking at the consequences of the activities we undertake in terms of their impact upon future generations, producing and consuming simultaneously and locally as much as possible, and whenever possible. And defining ultimately a collective management that's democratic. Energy policies are often, and this is very typical in terms of electric energy, but also, as Marisa says, it's as if this problem is considered only within an economic or even a financial framework in terms of profits and speculations, what can be speculated upon, whether we can have futures on the kilowatt hour. So we must raise our consciousness, understand that we have a role in all of this. Our reflection with our little small group in which I participate within my region, we came together to work against greenhouse gases. We often get together with the young people that are demonstrating these days. This is a very important problem to limit the heating of the atmosphere and limit and ultimately eliminate the use of fossil fuels. As if it were necessary, I have included here the graph of the increase of global temperature over the last 50 years. What I'm going to say is that this problem of climate change has to do with the energy transition, but not only that. It also has to do with the way in which we manage our land in order to produce food products. And to do this, we must continue researching in order to understand how to practice a proper management or handling of energy that is as efficient as possible. Here in the graph, I've included some examples of how different states take into account or fail to take into account these priorities in research and development. In Germany, a great deal of resources are dedicated to researching renewable energy and new technologies. If we look, however, Spain is not on this list, but if we look at the case of France, more than 50% of investment in research, scientific research, has to do with nuclear energy still. So even in the universities and study centers, we have to ask ourselves, why such a large resource dedication? We've seen that they're dedicating a lot of money into this sector of research. And I can say clearly that I know a professor who works on organic and photovoltaic sources, but he doesn't receive research funds. And he sees that they're spending a huge amount of money in other issues.
Which are the energy orientations of the states that depends a lot on lobbies? But the fact is that there are alternatives. The panelists before me spoke a lot about the use of renewable energies, and Giuseppe was saying also that we should start by saving energy at every level. We speak of sobriety or frugality is the same. This is the graph as a summary about how can we think an alternative. First, to oppose that increasing arrow, we may use sobriety, but there are many examples. At home, you should optimize heating. When you travel, you may do several tasks during transportation. There are many ways related to behavior where you can save energy. It's not about load oneself with many difficulties, but to reduce the energy consumption. Efficiency is needed both at the production level and at the use level. Each time you use a thermal plant with fossil fuel or uranium, you know that 2/3 of that energy is lost by losses because of physics and yielding of the turbines. You lose some half of the energy, and then inner losses of the system. Sometimes it's even worse because with uranium, you even consume energy for the production of fuel. So the yielding is really poor. At times it's just 25%. So there's a lot to do about efficiency. And on the other side of the energy cycle, there are many devices that waste energy. LED lamps, which are more efficient than the former lamps we were using 15 years ago. But in engines, for instance, there is still a lot of progress to be accomplished. I'm not really going to details, but if you want, we may speak about more specific thing. Of course, the deployment of renewable energies, because the sun sends lots of free energy to us, and the sun is a great nuclear reactor, but the waste remains there at the sun. So we must use sunlight, biomass, and also hydraulic energy. An example of what we do in France about scenarios. There is a very well-known association which is called Megawatt that created an alternative scenario with respect to the left scenario, which is the official trend. where you see the primary energy grows and grows every year. It is expected that consumption will increase always more, and megawatt using efficiency and sobriety criteria prove that a huge reduction in primary energy is possible, and this graph is about uses specific electricity, heat, mobility. The third colors below, and then we have thought of in several regions in France to use this same methodology to approach to the public, to the citizens. The national scenarios are important because a vision of the future should be useful for politicians that have to decide long term. But since we cannot wait for politicians to make the good decisions, we think that the regional level, like they did in Catalonia, but it could be done elsewhere, that scale corresponding a smaller territory is more adequate to advance proposals. Taking into account the specificities of the territory, what does the population need? How is it demographically evolving? Which is the availability of renewable energies in the area? And Pelalois, in my area, we have solar wind, biomass, and that little association, Virage Energy, climate turnabout. And we created this scenario until 2050. You see the blue curve corresponds to the energy demand or need of energy by people's consumption. We arrived to 100 terawatts of energy, heating, mobility, electricity. And we think that if we use this sobriety, efficiency, we may decrease that curve, reaching almost no consumption of this kind in 2045. In parallel, the green curve are the terawatts contributed by renewables. We see that after 2045, the region may even export energy to Paris, for instance, where there are increasing needs. So we get to this demonstration that the region could be not, it may turn autonomous, but not independent, because networks will continue to exist. So the conclusion is that all of this is feasible. I'm gonna do a zoom on some of our work, maybe to give you some ideas if you want to apply the system. To the left, the primary energy sources, everything in gray is We think that the gray areas should be abandoned. Yellow is everything renewable. I have chosen the example of eolic energy. Sorry, everything is in French because I didn't have the time to translate it. To the right, you see three big categories about energy needs: heating, mobility, and specific electricity. So we see the flow of energy, eolic energy. Yeah, sometimes it is useful to produce electric energy. Then that energy may be used following the horizontal arrow for lighting, for electric devices. But if there is no such need, you may produce hydrogen that may be used to, for instance, mobility. But you may use it to combine it with CO2 in this methanation process to produce synthesis methane that can be used for mobility as well. The advantage of methanation is that it can be stored because electricity is not easy to store. So we are linking electric and gas networks. Not everything is perfect. You have luces that go up into the sky, but luces are not so big. Are you following my argument? Because these ones offer a complete view of this scenario. Because here we take into account different renewable energies in yellow. Any of them, each of them can contribute to produce energy. We wanted to quantify everything. And without going into details, the third part comes from the wind, another third from solar radiation, and the third remaining part from biomass. That's the proportion for our region. And setting up from that, we may assume the needs. And in some cases, you see that for biomass, you may store energy, wood, for instance, also biomethane. And also, I'm not gonna tell you all the quantities, but look down to the right, you see 55.7 terawatts per hour, the total consumption of energy for 2040. This could be possible. That data may be compared with the total consumption of the region now, which is 100 terawatts now. So our work does integrate the growth of the energy consumption. From 100, we pass to 56. This is not the case. I'm finishing. Yeah. You can also see the production of the whole set of renewable sources, 73.5 terawatts. We have lost some 8 terawatts per hour. It's very little. The yielding of the system is better than the current one, where there is a lot of waste of energy. And to finish, some ideas as invitations. I think that if we want to, do we want these scenarios to be reality, to become into reality, assuming everybody's needs, we must keep on collaborating, making decisions together about energy uses. That's why I speak of energy democracy. We shouldn't wait for politicians from the top, neither from firms deciding about how we use energy. To that goal, we may organize scenarios, organizing in energy cooperatives. I think that in Spain you have some of them, not just production cooperatives, but also places in which people think how can they reduce consumption. I myself participate in France in a cooperative of aeolic energy. We have small meetings. Besides the project, we reflect about consumption reduction. We must also learn from each other. And this panel today is pretty interesting because we cannot think about everything by oneself. Together we are stronger. And also signing petitions, publishing articles, videos, and encourage the youth to gather and organize to together make the desirable into something possible. Thank you. It's 17:20. At 8, we are closing. So until then, you may want to take a walk. But until then, we have time for Q&A. Great, thank you. You have talked to us about the energy production efficiency and how can it be nuclear energy can be substituted and other negative energies. But in Spain, how could we change the official policy? Politics is what we do here. We are serving the people, and that's where my hope lies. How can we change the mindset of the official politicians, since the information I've got upon the very Nuclear Security Council is under such pressure from the lobbies that how is it possible for every panelist, but especially for Raquel? You're speaking about the ethical request, the concern about a human being. Is that ethics has to be present. So I congratulations for that, but how can we fight and triumph over the technocratic paradigm that dominates us? It's not just about techniques. When it's well used, it's cool. When that technique turns into technocracy, is unacceptable. Should we gonna be able, because technocracy is so powerful?
Difficult question. How can we change lobbies? Well, sometimes with a lot of patience and effort, and assuming that you can't always change it all, but you can always push in some direction from civil disobedience, civil society campaigns and dialogue. I would try any way that to approach any human from wherever they think, sometimes from emotion, sometimes with data. There's, of course, there's many economic interests, but also there's people. And people don't all act the same or think the same. I'm not trying to defend them, but I think that we should try every single possibility. There's also law frameworks that sometimes change these spaces, so we have to act. I don't think it is simply, there's only one way, but I think that we have to push in these directions, of course. And in respect of the other questions, I really don't know how to answer, but I can think of an example. When I think of when we speak about technology, a bucket in Africa to take water is technology. The difference between bringing the water in between your hands and a bucket is very different. And if this bucket doesn't have holes, it's very efficient. So who has this bucket and who doesn't have it? This is policy. Who has the right to carry it, or should we put wheels to this bucket? I mean, this example is good to think that technology is useful depending on how we use it. And now we have a big challenge as humanity, because there's an incredible change with information technology and communication. I'm speaking about internet, of course, and all the changes that comes from robotics and all this. This is a very incredible change, a very fast change, and I don't know if we will be able to overcome. But I really like to listen to Sole when she was speaking about the right to energy. This is my personal opinion, but I think there is a difference, a basic difference in the way you use energy. When you use energy, for example, to produce a good, and this has an economic benefit, this is a situation. This is one type of situation. And then another situation is when you are the one that needs the energy for heat, for cooking. This is another situation. Now we consume electricity and we don't think of these differences. Both cases should be renewable energy, clean energy, sustainable energy. For example, if you're speaking about farming, you also want sustainable energy, but you will always need this, you would always need water, you will always need energy. But you have to pay a cost, and this tomato that you farm will have a cost incorporated of this energy. But if the tomato, you're not going to sell it, but you're going to consume it, it's very different. So it's very different if if there's a productive process that you're going to have to make a benefit of, or if it's a process in which you're only going to benefit yourself. So yeah, this is my 2 cents. I wouldn't think of the question in terms of what can we do to change policies. I would think about it of how do we in our daily life do to change the way we use energy, because if we don't think and we don't question this in favor of our own interests, those who benefit of the situation are the big lobbies and the government, which is their instrument. And the second question on technocracy, I think technocracy has its power when civil society doesn't want to appropriate technology. I don't know if you asked yourselves, why do we all use computers, telephones, and we don't, for example, heat water with the sun, or we generate energy with sun? Why? Why don't we appropriate socially of these technologies? If we don't do this, if we shouldn't denounce others for abusing power because they are benefiting of this void. I also want to add something, if it's possible. Well, in our association, our small association, in which we were all whiteheads working on these things, and we did these public meetings to speak about these scenarios and show the work we had been doing. And at this moment, two young engineers, 25, 28, they are now encouraging the association. They are working in this association, and they are really, they took over the association, and they're in the heart of our work, and they took these ethics of our work, and they are working in social media. We weren't able to do this ourselves. And I think there's a lot of hope in this, in these generations to come, can take ideas and think of alternative proposals, because they know that there are impasses in the fossil fuels, in fossils, and they are reacting in a very positive way. So I think that if we think of civil society, we not waiting for what politicians will do for us, or not thinking about big companies, we can change things, because those politicians, those companies will have to adapt to us. Well, that's what I think personally. Maybe you think it's a little bit utopic, but I think there's no other way of sustaining the future of humanity. Okay, are there any more questions? Yes? Yes? Okay. If we take in account that the development of conserving energy are developing very quick, don't you think this could mean that this could be a real weapon against power, because all the storage of energy can change? They are speculating with energy, and they're retaining, because as energy can't be stored, it has to be used in certain moments. And this is kind of a way of blackmailing of the political power, because they force you to pay it at their price. But if we start to store energy, we may be able to overcome the situation. Yes, in Germany, there's 60,000 photovoltaic industries with storage. So nowadays, you can have power against oligopolies. You can just, in your house, you can store energy. When you're connected to the net, of course, I mean when you're connected to the network, but using all the energy that you generate yourself and importing the minimum quantity. Yes, there are different ways of storing, as well as, for example, hydraulic energy. You can store it. The there's many different concepts of energetic storage. When you're speaking about speculation, is who has these resources in their hands? Because if it is the citizens that have that are storing energy, if it's a community, a collectivity, a municipality, or a state that regulates, they are going to use different criteria. Of course, there's many different technologies and very energy technologies to come. So one thing is technology, and the other thing is how we use this technology. One more question.
On? Right. Very nice presentations. But as usual, my experience being in this movement the last 30 years, we start from the top. We are trying to convince the companies, don't make any more money. We are trying to convince the politicians, well, your way of handling energy is wrong. This is what we did, 15 years ago. Then I used to live in Vermont, and the parents have a voice in the educational system. My son was 8th or 9th grade, so I suggest them to teach energy and environment classes. They liked it. Teacher said, what a wonderful idea. And another parent said, well, it will be cut and paste. We are going to give them a homework. I said, no. The homework is going to be this. You are going to tell the kids, each kid is the manager of energy saving in their household. So at the beginning of the semester, they bring their utility bill. How much is the utility bill? $200 a month. At the end of semester or 2 semester, that kid, Cynthia, Charlie, we tell them, your homework is to go to the other room. If the light is on, turn off the light. If the water is leaking, turn off the water. Remind your parents, that's your future. And then bring your utility bills at the end of the semester. See the difference? That is your grade. And we had a scale. We said, if you save like 25% of the energy used in your family, you get B. If you save half of the energy, and they loved it, you get A. We have to start from the bottom. We spent the last 30, 40 years, all we did is try to convince the establishment and political power. We got to start from the bottom. Thank you.
Do you want to say anything about this? Yeah, very briefly. Yeah, I think that the bottom has already started. Here in Spain, I'm pretty excited. Since the last March the 15th, several thousand youth and teenagers, more than the meeting of the 3 extreme right parties, the teenagers or children were more than them in their demo, because we've been teaching about it for a long time in the schools and at home, that the homework should be saving energy. It should be a bottom-up movement, and it has already started, so I cross my fingers for them to be unstoppable. More questions? I couldn't listen to you because I was at the other panel, but I would like to say something about what Bernard said. I don't agree totally with him. I think there is an individual and local empowerment which is necessary.
cooperativas.
to be part of cooperatives, life options, consumption options, but not just the individual movement or little movements are going to change things, because the problem is so complex that you need to act at every front. You have this individual attitude and position, but we have to force the political changes. We must request from our politicians those legal changes. We must act as a lobby into the institution. We shouldn't discard any path, political, judicial. It is so complex that we must act at every front, because I believe in it, because that's my personal experience. It's absolutely necessary not to leave any front unattended. That you have spoken about lobbies, Harald Albert. Germany is the republic of the automobile, but Volkswagen has cheated on citizens, on governments. They have cheated on the software in order to avoid controls. They were thinking that they could do anything they want, and an NGO found out this fraud, and their prestige is totally crumbled. And Monsanto also has fallen. You see that there are firms that do lobbyism, and they are committing suicide. The issue is not whether the energy companies are smart and bet on renewables. It's for us to be intelligent and get rid of the energy companies. And if they close the nuclear, if they deny permissions to the nuclear, they're gonna go bankrupt. It's not just about empower ourselves, but also eliminating the mindset that hinder our fight, a struggle against it. The same with Bayer and France. In France, they had demonstration, and in Spain, just a small note in the newspaper saying that Bayer asked for pardon. Now the diesel issue, they say that the electric car emits more than the diesel. That's not true. So we must eliminate those mindsets and abandon also the faith in the so-called experts, which actually are technocrats. Two more questions. I would like to say something about one of the problems we have. The people, we don't get involved, we don't commit with the energy production. This is like when you ask a kid, where does milk come from? They say from the Tetra Brick. Where does energy come from? Yeah, from the switch off stick. Switch on, switch off stick. I tell this because I don't know how to go forward. In schools, like you were saying, they're doing things, the 50-50 project, anything that involves children is good for them because they like to be part of it, to touch, to feel. for children, but also for adults. But the way of learning, of doing, is involving, getting involved, learning by doing. We have also learned computer software and anything, all of this. How did we learn with smartphones? Children, when they are born, but as adults, you start to touch it, and finally, eventually, you learn, you know, the importance of communications. If we don't do the same with energy, we are not realizing, we are not understanding that it's our right, and you feel guilty when you cannot pay the electricity bill. Another, I would like to, in relationship with a former question, when they were saying that the regional focus is not effective, or the power of lobbies. I agree with Bernard. This slogan of think locally, act globally. Anything we can take from the system for self-sufficient spaces, in the case of energy, with more ground to it. Self-consumption, organizing, community organizing in a region, a village, a county. You keep the network. The network is totally necessary, but all those spaces that are spaces of experimentation, that raise awareness, that teach you how to live by saving electricity, living with less, and producing differently and clean at small scale. But that's a learning process. And you may also act globally about what's happening. So I agree with your ideas. Wish there were more experiences like that. And a question. It's a friend of mine has a problem with biomass on the platform. How much does biomass contaminate, pollute? Sorry. This is brief. I would like just to say thank you. And of course, we are loaded with optimism. We are in struggle for these goals, for these ideals we share, and we are strong. We are winning. Like you said, I was late. I've lost some of your interventions. I was at the other panel. I think the struggle goes on, and go get it. So thank you. If there are no more questions, just 3 words. Nor fossils, nor feasibles, nor rifles.